Okay, so I'm going to introduce you today to the New Fashion Landscape, which is a series of reports that we put together this year, really kind of outlining what the biggest issues and opportunities are facing our industry. And as we go through, I think we'll find that there are many examples that are really relevant cross-industry. So we're going to start by looking at some of the big issues driving the need for change in the industry. And first up, we're going to talk about seasonal disruption. And I've got some big stats here around climate change. And according to the United Nations, 250 million people will have been displaced by global warming by 2050. And the temperature of the planet will increase by 6 degrees by the end of this century. But fashion retailers and brands are already feeling the negative impacts of climate change on full price sales, with chaotic weather patterns really kind of throwing seasonal planning into disarray. And as an example, Macy's recently had to let 4,500 staff go down to really poor cold weather product sales. So countering seasonal markdown, which is on the increase, really needs to become a focus. And here we're seeing that season-neutral strategies come into play. As with here on this slide, Saint Laurent's permanent collection that's never discounted, and basically it contributed to the company breaking the $1 billion revenue barrier this year. They've cited that as very key in their strategy. Another tactic to counter seasonal uncertainty is to focus on heritage and craftsmanship. And we think we're going to see more and more of this, particularly at a luxury level. And Anya Hindmarch's bespoke workshop in their Pont Street branch is a great example of building an aspect of a business that's unaffected by the seasons. But the big focus in tackling this climate change is basically embedded in technology. And fabrics that are responsive and adaptive to a range of temperatures and environments are going to become all the more important. From a fashion perspective, Uniqlo is obviously leading the way in this with their hugely successful proprietary innovations. And it's one of the world's most season-neutral brands as well. And we talk a lot about season neutrality in countering climate change and sort of seasonal disruption. But there are other advancements going on with material innovations, particularly in the sports and medical sectors, that could potentially keep skin cooler than the natural and synthetic materials currently available. And we're seeing technologies borrowed from places like NASA to really regulate body temperatures beyond what we're seeing on a commercial level right now. And the scope for these harder working materials is obviously continuously growing as the issue of climate chaos becomes ever more important. Dovetailing neatly on from that, we want to talk about what we call the anti-trend, and this is where we're seeing various influences colliding. So let's set the scene for the anti-trend. We've got some big stats for you again. Global retailer Forever 21 stocks on average 539 new products every week. And Americans buy an average of 64 new clothing items per year. That's a lot of choice and that's a lot of spending. But in the developed world, consumers are becoming much more aware, obviously, of the negative impact of throwaway fashion. So we can really see that the tide's turning and information overload comes into play here, as does the fact that an active, comfort-based wardrobe has become a huge focus. And we're also living in increasingly small spaces. So we all really do want a simplified wardrobe for all kinds of reasons. So what we're seeing is that simplification strategies are emerging in all kinds of ways. We've got a great example here. The new design team at Courrèges recently launched this campaign, which really highlighted how they were taking their label back to basics. Effectively, they stripped the collection back to 15 key pieces. Vetements have done a similar thing in that they're saying, we only need 7 key Vetements pieces for a seasonal wardrobe. So these kind of simplification strategies, I think, possibly have really good transferable, a really transferable cross-industry. And new direct-to-consumer brand La Ligne is currently causing a storm with its range of key items that really go beyond trend. They kind of dare to not follow all the trends. And in their words, they do the job of those 6 pieces in your closet that are pretty much the only thing that you wear. I can definitely sort of relate to that, and I think lots of people I know can, is that we really do rely on a core wardrobe at the moment. And talking to lots of our fashion clients recently, they all love this brand and what they're doing. So again, it's another great example of a simplification strategy. And here we can see that Lacoste has also recently gone back to basics with a successful launch of its L1212 shoe. And this really simple shoe sums up the essence of Lacoste. And it's merchandised here with other key pieces in a core seasonless palette that doesn't change. Again, it's seasonless, doesn't change, doesn't get marked down. And I heard at their recent press day that this has been so successful, they're launching the concept for kids and for women next year. And then the idea of buy me once is also key to the anti-trend and addresses consumer frustrations with fast fashion and built-in obsolescence. And here, British designer Tom Cridland offers a collection of 30-year sweatshirts, T-shirts and jackets. So these are built to last for 30 years. And the price of purchase includes 3 decades of free mending services. Again, something that's maybe really relevant cross-industry when we're talking about sort of fatigue and peak purchasing. Or how about renting your fashion? Online fashion rental service Rent the Runway, which you probably know about, is really doing incredibly well. And I believe today they opened a permanent site in Manhattan. That's their new flagship. Recently opened, that opened today. So what we're looking at here really is lots of ways in which the fashion industry is addressing the fact that we have really reached peak stuff. Consumers do want to pare back. And I think, as I say, some great cross-industry inspiration there. And that leads us neatly onto our third big issue for the industry, which is obviously sustainability. Again, some key stats to set the scene. And the fashion and textile industry is actually the world's second biggest polluter after oil. As an example, it takes 2,700 litres of water to make the cotton for one T-shirt. And more than 50% of all garments manufactured are not recyclable and do not biodegrade. And really astonishingly, we recently learnt that 1/3 of all clothing manufactured is never even sold. So the world's water supply diminishes, and in light of that, smart brands are reimagining ways to avoid wasting the precious commodity. And both Beko and Siemens recently announced a new range of washing machines containing air therapy technology for waterless washing. And this idea of using less water is a key priority in fashion and textiles manufacturing, where we're way behind other industries in addressing this matter. But there are some exciting things happening in terms of natural material innovations, like leather produced from waste pineapple leaves, which we see here from Pinatex. And most excitingly, Swedish Innovation Centre Smart Textiles are engaged in a project that could really be a potential game changer for the textile industry, because it's found a methane filtration method to create textile fibres from greenhouse gases, potentially creating an incredible added positive effect on the environment. And upcycling of existing garments and textiles has long been a strategy for niche producers and independent traders, but we're now seeing that idea being upscaled by brands like Reformation, as well as Urban Outfitters, who are both establishing themselves as leaders in commercial volume upcycling. And I think that's a really great initiative that really could be taken to the next scalable level. And then finally, we're also calling out process of elimination as a key sustainability strategy. And Nike Flyknit is really the perfect example of this, the sort of successful reassessment of production processes with traditional cut and sew techniques in making shoes being replaced here by the much more nimble circular knit technique that produces 60% less waste. And that actually saved Nike £3.5 million since Flyknit launched only 4 years ago. And eliminating production processes is obviously one sustainability strategy that is really, again, very transferable across industry. Okay, so that just touches on some of the big issues facing the industry going forward. And now we're going to look at some of the biggest future opportunities in fashion. We're going to start with athleisure. Again, some stats, and sales in the active and athleisure apparel and footwear categories are predicted to grow to $400 billion by 2020, representing further growth of $80 billion in the next 4 years. And as we highlighted recently in some of our reporting, to a huge degree, this is cannibalizing other more traditional apparel categories. And the key driver here is not actually being active. It's not about going to the gym. It's about being comfortable. It's about comfort. And consumers are now looking for extreme comfort all day, every day, in everything they wear. So there's a massive opportunity for brands and retailers imbuing all of those kind of comfort qualities associated with activewear in garments appropriate for even the office. And as we see activewear really influencing our all-day, everyday wardrobes, we're starting to see a shift within performance and studio wear itself. So here it's actually becoming more nuanced and more fashionable, inversely to how our day-to-day wardrobes are becoming more sort of generic and comfort-based. And here we've got a great example of Charlotte Olympia's collection for bodyism. Really looks quite unlike anything else on the market, and that's really resonated with customers who want that activewear with a bit more creative input. And for brands and retailers looking to grow their business in the athleisure and activewear categories, easy incremental sales can be harnessed by incorporating the latest in lifestyle products for a more rounded offer. And I would say that Selfridge's Body Studio is a great example of a retailer sort of going for gold in this, in its aim to be #1 destination for luxury, active and leisure apparel and accessories. And they carry brands such as Friends, luxury headphones that we see here. But I also want us to think about the luxury of sleep, because it's not just about being active or working out, it's about being leisurely, as in athleisure. And in 2014, the global nightwear market reached $29.2 billion in sales, expanding at a rate of 11% per annum from 2009 to 14. And Euromonitor expects the category to grow an additional 16% between now and 2019. So that's really kind of working inversely to the way we're tracking core apparel sales. Another interesting stat for you is that we recently spoke to Selfridge's press office, and they saw a 500% increase in nightwear sales in the 3 years to 2016, and are predicting further exponential growth as part of their new 37,000 square foot body studio that obviously covers off all of these categories. So huge growth predicted here in active, athleisure, sleep and lounge. All of those things really cannibalising more traditional and more formal apparel and accessory categories. Okay, so from athleisure to modest dressing, and again, we've got some interesting stats for you. Currently, Muslim consumers spend an estimated $230 billion on clothing per annum, but that figure is projected to grow to $484 billion by 2019. That's according to Reuters. That's more than the current combined clothing markets of the UK, Germany and India. And also, interestingly, the GDP of countries with a majority Muslim population is projected to grow at an average of 5.4% a year, compared with 3.4% for Europe and the US. So what we're already seeing is a massive increase in modest dressing globally, with a width of brands from Mango to Dolce & Gabbana entering the marketplace with specific modest collections, like Uniqlo's collaboration with modest influencer Hannah Chijima, whose collection has now become a continuity offer, and that's her autumn-winter range that we see here. And influencers are really big news here, and we're seeing the rise of some really key Generation M entrepreneurs and social media players as part of this, such as Shaheen Hussain, whose mocktail company sold 19,000 bottles of non-alcoholic drink in the first 3 months. And the supermarkets are already onto this, and we can learn a lot from the grocery sector, who basically experienced a huge surge in sales during Ramadan, with product pull-togethers and promotional activity at Tesco delivering a 70% increase in sales on promoted items over the period. That equates, this year, that equated to £30 million in revenue. And I think this idea of pull-togethers is one that could be relevant year-round for fashion retailers and brands, as well as other industries such as beauty. Here's an example of a great beauty product development aimed at the Muslim consumer with Body Shop's countdown to Eid calendar. And just one other insight to leave you with in this section is that Fortune magazine recently predicted that modest dressing will represent the single biggest opportunity for growth in women's wear for the next 5 years. Okay, so to the third of our opportunities, and this is all about size. 67% of American women now wear a US size 14 and up, and in the UK, figures are over 50%. While in the UK, the plus-size category will grow to £7 million in the 4 years, £7 billion in the 4 years to 2020, and this represents an astonishing growth of 28% for the period. But the disparity between real sizes and size offers at retail represents a real valuable missed opportunity. That's estimated to be worth $9 billion in the US alone. And the industry's exclusionary approach is really looking more outdated than ever. But change is underfoot, and we're starting to see more retailers and brands developing better, considered ranges in larger sizes, as well as colleges taking on a more inclusive approach in teaching design around this. And here we can see fashion website Refinery29, who recently launched their 67% campaign with the aim of representing women's real sizes across all of its content, reflecting the stat that we just saw. So rather than majority of women being represented on the site being a size 8 6810, 67% of the women represented on the site will be a US size 14 and up. So to be a size 14 is not marginal, we know that from the stats, and you could argue then why have the plus size moniker? And there are some key influencers out there who are really pushing for a shift in attitudes around this, such as Ashley Graham, who actually made the front of British Vogue this month, as well as Glamour magazine. And let's not forget about the men. This is Zach Myko, the first model with IMG's larger size men's division called Brawn. And in the UK, larger size menswear sales topped £2 billion last year, but 58% of big and tall men told us that they would spend more on clothing if there was more choice available to them. So with the menswear sector growth outpacing women's wear globally, again, this represents a real opportunity for the future. And I think a more realistic, inclusive approach to size representation will become really key, whatever industry you work in. Okay, so let's now move on to the third and last part of our presentation today. And here we're going to touch on a couple of consumer segments where we are seeing real shifting attitudes that retailers and brands need to be aware of in order to engage better. And first up, we're going to talk about gender, and specifically about Gen Z and younger. So a recent report finds only 48% of Gen Z identify as exclusively heterosexual, while 56% know someone who goes by gender-neutral pronouns. And more than 80% strongly believe that gender does not define a person as much as it used to. And they reject the gender binary while shopping, with only 44% always buying clothes designed for their own gender. And these stats vary significantly from those recorded at the same time for millennials, whose attitudes are much more fixed in traditional binary definitions. And so what we're seeing is the rise of unisex apparel ranges, with notable launches this year from Guess and Zara, and also that influencers and engagement strategies are starting to reflect a more fluid mood. And this year saw a number of notable campaigns extending a more gender-fluid marketing message, such as Jaden Smith for Louis Vuitton, Diesel's This is Gender Neutral project that we see here, as well as Harry Neff fronting And Other Stories All Trans campaign. And clearly this shift is really relevant to all industries wanting to engage well with Gen Z. And we need to think about gender identity in children, because progressive brands are already responding to shifting attitudes with a much more universal approach to product development and marketing around children. Here we can see Jamie King's recent gender-neutral children's wear collaboration with American brand The Guardian and the Gang. And basically the garments are not separated or colour-coded by gender, and models of all genders wear the same clothing in the campaign. And traditional school uniforms also came into focus as well this year, with 80 state schools across the UK, including 40 primary schools, introducing a gender-neutral uniform policy which allows girls to wear trousers and boys to wear skirts. And that's part of a big government-funded drive to support LGBT plus children in schools. And here are some really commercial examples of a more universal approach within the children's sector that are super relevant for a width of industries. So following Target's removal of gender-specific toy signage, they've launched a gender-neutral home offer for kids. That's called Pillow Fort, and it replaces their $1 billion netting Circo label, and it really marks Target's ongoing drive for a more inclusive approach. And Disney Stores is also going some way to break down the traditional gender divide that exists in its offer, and it's no longer splitting Halloween costumes by gender. Instead, they're simply categorising them as for kids, for babies, no boys or girls segmentation. So gender is firmly on the agenda for junior demographics. Whatever industry you're in, engaging with them with a more fluid approach is really key. And from younger to older. And in this last section, in advanced aesthetics, we're looking at the shifts in taste amongst the 50-plus demographic. In the UK, the 50-plus demographic actually accounts for over 50% of consumer spending, and also accounts for a huge 70% of total consumer wealth, which translates into £6.2 trillion across 22 million individuals. But there's a real disconnect here in terms of image and taste. And if you think about it, with the current generation of 60-year-olds having lived through punk, and those in their 50s having been potentially part of the original rave generation, the emerging older demographic often doesn't look or think like the image represented by the fashion industry. And brands and retailers hoping to engage more accurately with this very lucrative segment could do well to look at the real lifestyle choices of 50-plus consumers, and they might be surprised to find it's less about cruises and more about clubbing. As an example, the Sheen Resistance here has been hosting sold-out parties across southwest London since 2009, and these parties are firmly aimed at an audience from old enough to remember the tunes from first time round. But it's totally indicative of a more youthful approach to socialising amongst the emerging older demographic, and these clubs are popping up all over the UK and the US now. And active lifestyles are obviously now a priority for all, but the reality of 50-plus fitness is more about achieving eternal youth than simply being a sort of gentle pastime. And Dana Flynn and Colleen Seidman that we see here really do represent a new breed of fitness pin-ups for females over 50. And all of this is really relevant to any brand wanting to engage better with this new 50-plus. But in terms of fashion, the new 50-plus consumer really does feel very undervalued and underserved. There are some brands getting it right, tapping into this demographic's taste for, as a priority, authenticity, heritage, product integrity. Fred Perry, I think, is one example, as is Clarks, and Adidas really lead the way when it comes to riffing on an archive which appeals to this older demographic. But some recent stats from JD Williams tell us that while over 80% of 50-plussers feel really confident in their own personal style, over 50% of them say it's hard to find clothing to suit them. And obviously it's not just about the product, it's really very much here about the marketing. And marketing messages cross-industry for older demographics are often really depressingly dull or mixed up. In fact, 76% of women aged 50 plus feel that they're really not well represented in advertising at all. Things are changing with older influencers like Sarah Jane Adams here, who works very closely with Adidas, and May Musk on the right, who's with cool older model agency, Mrs. Robinson. But given that this demographic represents 50% of total consumer spending and 70% of consumer wealth, there's clearly still a massive opportunity here.